and welcome to the LLG Grapevine podcast. You're listening to Helen McGrath, Head of Public Affairs, and Dennis Hall, LLG Bulletin Editor.
Hello, everyone.
Now, many councils are reviewing their commercial contracts with Russian companies. Dennis, what's the latest?
Helen, as the Ukraine tragedy unfolds before us, there is wide-ranging commentary in our sector about disengaging from Russian state-owned companies as part of the government policy to maximise economic pressure on Russia. Here's my summary on the procurement issues involved. It was reported last week that Merton Council is to write to the government to ask for urgent changes to the laws around who councils can choose to do business with, as the London Borough seeks to terminate a gas contract with Russian energy supplier Gazprom. Leader Mark Allison said, "Under the law, all council contracts are commercially driven. We need the ability to refuse to do business with such firms based upon their moral or social suitability, not just their commercial offer." Earlier this week, Suffolk County Council said that it would end a contract with the Russian energy company as well. Now, Merton is set to follow suit, saying its move was in response to the atrocities being committed by the Russian state in Ukraine. Gazprom was due to begin a new one-year, £1 million contract to supply gas across Merton's buildings, including leisure centres, libraries and some schools. Merton said the council had no choice but to enter into a contract with Gazprom, which has supplied the authority for 8 years, after they were the only bidder to respond to the procurement of the contract. Others are reported as suggesting that sanctioning Gazprom would make it legally easier for councils to exclude them from the usual contract tendering processes. Salford City Council's Paul Dennett has called on the government to clarify if councils can lawfully refuse to deal with Russian state-owned firms. LLG has already published guidance to assist councils in making these decisions in this difficult and uncertain area.
Yes, and our thanks to Kieran Gahi, LLG National Lead, for his work on that. Now, the Independent Committee on Standards in Public Life has launched Leading in Practice, a review examining the role of leadership in embedding the principles of public life in public sector organisations. The review will look at examples of good practice in a range of organisations, including public bodies, charities, private companies, and those private companies providing services paid for by the taxpayer. It will seek to understand the path that organisations have taken and how difficulties were overcome along the way. Announcing the review, Committee Chair Jonathan Evans said, "Rules and procedures are necessary to prevent corruption, but they are not all that is needed to ensure high standards in public life. After all, it's not possible to write a rulebook to cover every possible ethical dilemma a public servant may face. Living up to a shared public service ethos, as set out in the 7 Principles of Public Life, helps staff at all levels make the right judgment calls and demonstrate the highest ethical standards as they go about their work on the public's behalf." He went on, "I know that the great majority of public office holders are motivated to do the right thing, but the way an organisation operates can hinder or facilitate that happening. Leadership is one of the 7 principles and is critical to supporting ethical behaviour in an organisation. They will be examining the role of leadership at all levels in embedding the 7 principles in the approach and practices of public sector organisations. LLG will report more on the review as it progresses." Dennis, I see that changes are being proposed to the Solicitors' rules concerning challenging bad behaviour.
Yes, Helen. The latest consultation intends to establish major changes to the roles of solicitors in calling out bad behaviour by colleagues. Let me explain further. The Solicitors Regulation Authority wants to introduce a new requirement on firms and solicitors to step in and deal with anyone who is mistreating colleagues in the workplace. Proposed changes to SRA rules aim to give the regulator greater scope for clamping down on anyone who perpetrates or facilitates bullying, harassment, or discrimination. An explicit obligation on individuals and firms to treat colleagues fairly and with respect would be added to the Code of Conduct. On top of this, firms and solicitors will have to challenge behaviour which does not meet this standard, with the aim of fostering a collegiate approach and a culture in which poor behaviours are not tolerated. Now, the changes will be seen as a response to recent cases coming through the Solicitors Disciplinary Tribunal, where solicitors have alleged bullying or discrimination in the workplace. While those committing such acts have often received sanctions, questions have been raised about workplace culture. The SRA's proposal is that the obligation should go beyond staff in a formal employment relationship to include others with whom solicitors and firms regularly work closely, such as contractors, consultants, barristers, and experts who may be instructed by the firm or organisation. Although the obligation is principally intended to cover behaviour at work, whether in an office or remotely, it would also cover behaviour outside the workplace or involving the direct delivery of legal services. The consultation closes on the 27th of May.
So one definitely to take a look at. Now, LLG has published its response to the human rights consultation, as have numerous organisations and local authorities. The Human Rights Act plays a key and critical important role in the fundamental protection of human rights. The Independent Human Rights Act review itself found no good cause for making significant changes to the Human Rights Act, and LLG do not support proposals which seek to reduce the accountability of public authorities or undermine the rule of law. LLG supports Sir Gross, who originally led the government's commissioned review position, where he points out that the paper is silent about the margin of appreciation or dialogue with Strasbourg, and in respect of his led commissioned review, that the government had not explained where it differs from us, its reaction to the width and depth of the view which informed our deliberations. Those are just some of the gaps. Of note is the fact that the easy read version of the consultation was only supplied 12 days prior to the deadline for responses, and no audio file had been provided by that point. I myself noted on the day the consultation closed that an extension had been granted for those affected by the lack of easy read or audio version, the latter of which had been uploaded until the 19th of April 2022. It was an interesting omission, given the subject matter that it took nearly 3 months for equality of access to be provided. Given the outspoken remarks of the Welsh and Scottish Parliaments and the robust concern expressed by legal organisations, including the Law Society and LLG, it will be interesting to see whether the government will narrow its current position to human rights reform. Moving on, solicitor training and competency is also in the news this week, and I see it's become very controversial. Dennis, tell us more.
Yes, there is a disagreement between the Law Society and the Legal Services Board on what a new framework should look like. Here's my report. It was reported last week that the Law Society say that solicitors should decide for themselves what gaps in training they need to fill, rather than have regulators tell them. This was a key message from the Law Society as it responded to the Legal Services Board's policy proposals for maintaining ongoing competence. The oversight regulator wants bodies such as the Solicitors Regulation Authority to set up a new framework for assessing competence and to impose regular checks. The board also wants frontline regulators to make interventions to ensure minimum standards are maintained and to take suitable action where solicitors have fallen short. But the Society rejected the basis for the policy, saying the board had not shown that any significant issues currently exist with the competence of solicitors. Society President I. Stephanie Boyce said, "It is important to us that the profession is able to demonstrate how it maintains and promotes high competence standards, so we welcome the board's focus in this area." There is, however, no evidence of widespread issues demonstrated by the board's work to date, though she acknowledged that there is a problem with public perception, with a public panel survey showing that 95% thought that checks should be made throughout a legal professional's career. The Society backed some form of compulsory training in areas such as equality, diversity and inclusion, and IT, but said this should be determined by the individual, who is best placed to know what training they need. Boyce also added that other measures outlined by the Legal Services Board, reaccreditation, revalidation, competence assessments, observations and examinations, would be costly and time-consuming and are unnecessary at this time for the entire profession.
A survey of almost 800 local authority representatives has found that 2/3 feel they lack the powers to properly represent the needs of their local community, the Electoral Reform Society has said. Dr. Jess Garland, Director of Research and Policy at the Society, stated, "It is clear that, for many who serve their communities at the coalface of local democracy, questions remain unanswered about how relations between the centre and localities can be better structured in favour of local decision-making. With so many local councillors feeling powerless to serve their constituents' needs, we must find a better balance between those two levels of government that truly serves the interests of communities across England." This report begins to set out how a new relationship between national and local government can be created, how a policy of devolution in England could be developed, and the principles which should underpin such a move. She went on, "It is not for the centre at Westminster to decide how local communities should see themselves and how they should be governed, but to set out how those communities can choose their own governance, how citizens can themselves reinvigorate local democracy. Now is the time to rebuild our local democracy, but to do that, England can no longer be an afterthought." Strong words indeed. And there's a big question mark around whether levelling up is able to address concerns raised by the society within England. As ever, this remains to be seen. Now, you can find more on these items and many more by going to Bulletin 10, available on the LLG website now. So it's goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me too.
Thank you for listening. Have a good week, everyone.